Kostya sits back in his chair, the cold glass of vodka resting in his hand. The room is quiet, save for the low murmur of the television in the background. His face is calm, but his mind races as he thinks about the indictment. The charges against him and Lena are laid out in black and white. Conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, computer fraud. All for their work with Russia Today, the state-controlled media outlet that had been an easy target for the West, especially after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But to Kostya, these charges are just symbols in a much larger game. They need someone to blame. That's what this is about, he mutters to himself. He's not outraged, just resigned. The $10 million they funneled through foreign shell companies had been part of a larger strategy. RT needed to shift gears after being banned in the US, and funding Tenet through layers of shadowy transactions was a calculated move. But what of it? The world runs on foreign money, yet only his actions seem to warrant an indictment. As Kostya sips his drink, he thinks of Lena Afanasieva, his colleague and partner in this endeavor. They had worked closely together, building a network of influence that quietly infiltrated U.S. media. But now they were being painted as criminals, scapegoats in a geopolitical chess match. The charges against them felt almost laughable in light of what he knew about the world's true power players. They're coming after us for RT, but where are the indictments for Qatar, for China? He murmurs, glancing at the tablet screen in front of him. The headline about Qatar's multi-million-dollar investments in U.S. universities flashes in front of him. No one's shutting down their influence. Kostya leaned back, looking at the financial reports in front of him. U.S. Company One, Tenet Media, a Tennessee-based media operation, had grown rapidly over the past few years. Thousands of videos circulated across TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram, each carefully researched, sharper than anything coming out of mainstream American media. The content didn't need to invent problems, just illuminate the cracks in U.S. society. It was perfectly crafted to stir unrest, to push existing tensions a little further. The brilliance wasn't just in the content, but in how subtly it all worked. It was clever, almost too easy. How the money quietly flowed through a network of shell companies in Turkey, the UAE, and Mauritius, keeping the true source of the funding hidden. The layers of transactions weren't complicated for someone who knew the game. It was simple, elegant, and highly effective. The founders of Tenet Media had no idea who was really behind the money that powered their growth. To them, it seemed like a lucky break, investors swooping in to fund their independent media venture. They didn't ask questions when the funds arrived, and why would they? As long as they could keep making their content, no one cared where the nearly $10 million had come from. Everything looked legitimate on the surface, and that was all that mattered. They never suspected, Kostya thought, a small smirk forming. Why would they? Everything fit perfectly into place. The setup had been intricate, but that's why it worked. The money flowed through shell companies, empty corporate fronts set up in places like Turkey, UAE, and Mauritius, where the financial systems had just enough flexibility to allow large sums to move without anyone raising an eyebrow. It was no different from how organized criminals laundered money through legitimate businesses. The layers of transactions made it almost impossible for anyone to trace it back to RT. Lena had suggested using the pretense of buying iPhones and electronics, things innocuous enough to avoid suspicion, but significant enough to move large amounts of cash. It had worked like a charm. No alarms were triggered, and Tenet Media kept thriving while no one questioned the source of the funds. From the shadows, Kostya and Lena controlled the flow of money, ensuring Tenet Media stayed on track, its founders blissfully unaware of the hands that were really pulling the strings. It was almost laughable how simple it had been. They didn't need to create the company themselves. They just had to quietly fund it, and guide it. No one was any the wiser. The indictment painted their actions as criminal, but Kostya saw it as just another transaction, another deal that no one had thought to question. It wasn't about creating something new. It was about using what was already in place, just directing it where they needed it to go. Looking out over the city, Kostya allowed himself a rare smile. The brilliance wasn't in what they built, but in how they had stayed invisible while doing it. They weren't the first to move money like this, and they wouldn't be the last. But now they were being targeted, not because of what they'd done, but because of who they were. We were just moving money, Kostya thought, but because it's us, it's a crime. The web of shell companies had kept them protected for years. But now, the U.S. government was finally piecing it together. The transfers, the fake purchases, the millions flowing through accounts. It was all starting to come into focus. And yet, despite the pressure closing in, Kostya couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. They had played the game, and they had played it well, even if it was all about to come to an end.